My name is Damien, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about the three main principles of photography. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the inner workings of a camera and how you can use the three main pillars of photography: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO to get your pictures taken well. So before I start, I want y'all to close your eyes. So imagine it's a cold winter morning and an old family friend shows up. This is the last thing you were expecting this morning. And as you receive the gift with your name on it, there is a black camera in it, cheap, very fragile to the touch. And you're left kind of asking a couple questions like, why did I get a camera? How do I use it? And what's the purpose of this? Right? You can open your eyes now. At least these were the questions that were going through my mind when I was 8, right? So today I'm going to be answering one of those questions, and hopefully it'll help you guys with your own photos. And that one's how to use a camera. So the first thing I'm going to talk about out of these three is aperture. So first we're going to define what aperture is. An aperture is a hole or an opening through which light travels through a camera lens. One thing I like to sort of associate with the camera lens is that a camera lens is very similar to the iris of the eye, in an article from sciencing.com in March 2nd, 2019. Some further explanation for that is the aperture size refers to how large the opening to let the light in is. The more it's open, the more light shines through. And the less light is open, or the less the hole is open, the less light is shown through. And this is the same for our eyes, actually. So we measure aperture in something called f-stops, right? You may have heard of aperture or f-stop 8 or f-stop 16, or you may have heard of like f-stop 5 or even as low as f-stop 1.4, right? So a larger or a greater aperture, I would say it's great for when you want to differentiate your subject from the background. So a larger aperture like f-stop 1.4, and it's actually opposite. So the larger the aperture is, the larger the hole is, but the lower the aperture number is. So for example, aperture or f-stop 1.4 is actually relatively a big opening, actually. But it sounds like a small number, so it got me confused as well. And these are great for portraits, animals, and really all like food photography maybe. Really anytime you want to blur the background. That's another thing that Aperture does. It also has a depth of field focus to it. So what is depth of field? Depth of field is essentially the degree to which your camera is keeping something in focus. So the best way I know how to explain this is you might use a smaller aperture for if you're taking photos of a mountain range, right? You want the whole image to be in focus, right? Everywhere from the trees in the front to the peaks of the mountain all the way in the back. You want the whole thing in focus. And it's really good for really landscape photography, I would say. So you wish to have both background and foreground in focus. And it's also good for like a lot of products and even cinematography as well. So after we've talked a little bit about aperture, I want to move on to something called shutter speed. And you've probably heard of this, if anything. If out of the three, you've heard of shutter speed. And shutter speed is essentially the amount of time the camera sensor has been exposed to light while taking a photo. And just like we did for aperture, you can also relate it to how an eye blinks, actually. So if you look around and you close your eyes, you open them really fast, you're going to see really choppy footage or choppy view from your eyes, versus when you keep your eyes open, everything is clear, right? So when your eyes are open like that, everything is smooth. That's the same for when your shutter speed is super low. When your shutter speed is super low, like, I'm sorry, when your shutter speed is super high, that's like when you're just opening your eyes. You can see everything because the motion is smooth. So, one thing I like to reference, James Palmer put it, is shutter speed is essentially a measure of time, and the more you, the faster you close your eyes. I'm sorry. Eyes open and close just like the shutter does. The shutter speed is how fast this happens, measured in seconds. So that's really all shutter speed is. It is all have to do with seconds and how long you're closing your eyes, opening and closing. So a faster shutter speed is good for like sports or really high moving objects that are fast. You want this to be able to snapshot it real quick, right? So that would mean you want your shutter speed to be like 1 over 800 or 1 over 1600, right? These are faster shutter speeds. You can go up to cameras that are 6400. So for reference, a hummingbird can flap its wings 70 times per second, right? A shutter speed of 1 over 1600 is just enough to get even a hummingbird's wings perfectly clear, to freeze it. And that's what you want. Now, while faster shutter speeds are great for a lot of things, shutter speed can have an effect on your light. So the longer your shutter is open, the more time it has to let light into the sensor. And this can be a good thing and a bad thing. So a slow shutter speed is good for night, actually, because that long exposure, it allows for a greater picture at night for long shutter speed. And you can even have low ISO to maintain a clear image if you have a tripod. That's recommended. However, most people with really nice cameras, they like to have their ISO pretty high. And we're going to talk about ISO in a minute so you understand that as well. And now that we've talked a little bit about shutter speed, we can move on to ISO. And what is ISO? ISO is the camera's sensitivity to light. So picture like your car radio. When you turn up and down the volume, it gets louder, right? So in the same way, when you turn up the ISO on your camera sensor, you are increasing how sensitive it is to light. You're increasing the light in the image. However, it does have a downside. It has a downside. In an article titled, "What is ISO? Understanding ISO for Beginners," brightening a photo via ISO is always a trade-off. And it's very true. Just like when you turn up your car radio too much, it can start to get static, right? So you get static in the same way, and it's called actually grain, film grain, in your photo. When you increase the ISO too much, your photos can come out grainy. So low ISOs like 100 or 200, they're great for just everyday, like broad daylight. You have plenty of light in your photo. You don't need it any higher, right? Because otherwise it's just going to make it grainy. Versus a high ISO, like 1600 or 3200, that's really great for like night photography or darker places. And you will need to use ISO typically at the end. Out of the three, ISO is typically the last thing you want to edit in any given scenario. Aperture or shutter speed are generally the first thing you want to edit. And this is because, given your scenario, like if you are at a football game and you want to take photos of these players running, you would want to adjust your shutter speed first and foremost to really capture the image the way you want it to. So Lastly, I kind of just wanted you all to know a little bit more about aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Hopefully, after this video, you understand a little bit more about these principles and how you can apply them in your photography. So, in conclusion, aperture is that hole or opening through which lets in light. It controls your focal distance, and it also controls how much light comes into your photo. Shutter speed is similar to how our eyes blink. The way it opens and closes, it's almost like animation. If you've ever researched animation, have you ever heard of like Into the Spider-Verse? Whenever they actually decreased the FPS, the frames per second, to make it look more choppy. It's the same way for photographers, and you can use this to your advantage. And finally, ISO is that setting on the camera that determines how sensitive your camera is to light. So, why am I telling you all about this? Why is it so important for me to share about the three principles of the three principal functions of a camera? Ultimately, in an article, The Shutter Speed of Our Eyes says, ultimately, our job is to harness the photograph as a tool instead of becoming its slave. And I think that if any of these photos scare you away from photography, most phones have the capability of taking great photos automatically. They don't need to alter any of these settings. Like the iPhone 15 just came out at the time of recording, and the photos it takes, like, it's sad to see, but it takes fantastic photos. It made well enough to make many cameras, like beginner friendly cameras, irrelevant because they're so good at what they do. But really what I was trying to do in making this video was to help you guys develop a deeper appreciation for photographers and photography as a whole. While it doesn't necessarily, you don't need to know these things. They actually do increase your skills when using an automatic camera. Take out your phone right now. I mean, you're probably watching this on your phone. Odds are, if you take a photo and you click on the screen, you can adjust the exposure levels, right? Especially on Apple, they have this function. It shows a little yellow square, right? You can raise and lower the exposure. Take a photo with the exposure down, and then what I want you to do is go into your photos, go to that photo, click the info, like the information circle thing on that photo, and scroll down, and you'll see the ISO is probably pretty low. It's probably going to be within hundreds or 200s, if I'm going to be honest. Versus if you were to take a photo again, raise that exposure level, raise it, and look at the information bar, and you'll see the same thing, except the ISO is now raised. It's probably above 1200 now. So this just goes to show you that any of these three elements can be used in your automatic photography. And there's nothing wrong with using automatic cameras. They will do the job capturing the photos, but my goal was to just help you appreciate the art of photography and using these three elements to your advantage. But that's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.